Well, hi. I'm back. It's Sarah Holtzclaw, and this is the legal aspects of business. In module number 4, we're going to talk about hiring issues. Look at that. It's a disclaimer. I by no means am offering any legal advice. There are employer and HR professionals that you can hire that will help you with some of these issues. This is just intended for information so you kind of know what you're up against. We're going to talk about, in this particular module, we're going to talk about issues that you need to consider. We're going to talk about a little bit about discrimination and how to avoid it. Give you a little bit of interviewing things, information. I'll just touch on IRS and Social Security withholdings just so you know what you need to do. And then there's a couple basic labor laws that you need to be aware of. So let's talk first about hiring issues and some of the things that you're going to come up against. You need an employment identification number, and you need that even for just yourself. So an EIN is kind of like a Social Security number for business. Um, if you are currently working and have an employer, that EIN number would be seen on your W-2 tax forms. Starts with a 9-3 or a 9-4 or whatever. And then there's a lot of numbers. There's a federal tax ID number and there's a state tax ID number. But every business needs to have one, and you'll certainly need it as an employer when you hire your first and second employees. You need to register with the California Employment Department. Employment Development Department, I think, is the EDD. A lot of these links are at the bottom of the module too in Canvas. But you need to register because they need to make sure that you are doing what you need to do from your withholdings and workman's comp and that sort of thing. There are some other documents that you need to do, and you need to make sure that that you have and that you keep. For example, just one of them would be an I-9, which is the form that you need for every employee needs to give you proof that they have the right to work in the United States. And that is a form that you would then keep and hold on to so that when you do get the IRS coming or the immigration or Homeland Security, whoever's coming and checking up on you, making sure that you have that in your records, that you've seen their passport or their ID, their birth certificate, or their military IDs and that sort of thing. But it's called the I-9. It's the proof of citizenship. Some other issues you need to remember are taxes and accounting, equal employment opportunity commission, non-discrimination laws. There are right to work, employment at will. California, for example, is a employment at will, um, and you are able to um, hire and fire at will. That's what employment at will. Of course, your employees are able to quit at will. They don't have to give you 2 weeks. They can just say, "I quit," and they don't have to give you any reason. That's what employment at will is. And of course, there is the minimum wage, competitive wage that you need to keep track of. The minimum wage in California, um, as of January 1, is and will be $11 an hour. And there are different minimum wages in different cities and counties. So you need to be aware of what that minimum wage is. For instance, if you're going into San Francisco or San Jose, Berkeley, Emeryville, all of them have higher minimum wages than the state minimum wage. So you need to make sure that you know what that is. But that does not mean that that's a competitive wage. So in the environments that we live in the Bay Area, the minimum wage just won't cut it as far as being able to live and having a living wage. And it takes more than minimum wage to be able to compete and to be able to get the employees that you are looking for. Some other issues that you need to think about is having some contracts, having a handbook so that you make sure that everybody knows what your policies are, what your dress code is, what the sanctions are if they don't turn up on time, if they don't give no call, no shows, if those kinds of things. To make sure that you have policies in place that will give you a legal standing when something happens. Some particular employers will look for a non-disclosure agreement depending on what your business is, especially maybe if you have a new business that is somewhat, you want to keep it kind of secret. You want to make sure that they are not going to talk about it when they go out to their families or to their friends or to a competitor and that sort of thing. You need to know how you're going to get people to apply. You're going to need an application form. You're going to need reference checks so that they give you information as to who they can call, who you can call to check up and make sure that they worked as they say they did. Applications can be online and they can be in paper form. I would suggest you actually have them on in both cases because some people, depending on what your job is that you're trying to do, but some people just don't know how to fill out an application online. That may be okay for you. It may be that if they can't do it on an application online, then they don't have the skills that they need to do the job. So it just kind of depends. You also want to see if you want to have that form in Spanish or in Chinese or in another language. Other types of hiring issues, background checks, fingerprinting are all okay to do. There are different levels of background checks. You can just do a cursory one. You can hire companies that do those background checks to make sure. There are fingerprinting companies, live scanned people that do those. There is also a trend, but in my opinion, not a very good one, but a trend for people who are going to be hiring an individual to look at their credit. In some states, that's illegal now, and I just don't think that it's something that an employer needs to be aware of. I just don't think that is the, my humble opinion is that it's not um, that's not your purview. So as an employer, but some people are doing it because if they can't pay their bills, then what kind of a responsible person are they? But there are all sorts of extenuating circumstances that you shouldn't know about that may come into those credit reports. So I think it brings up more hassle than it's worth. You probably need to know whether or not you're allowed to bring in foreign workers, what kind of paperwork you need, what kind of visas they need. If you're going to use foreign workers, what if farm workers get a lower minimum wage than the rest of the state? So you need to know what is involved with employing foreign workers, H-1B visas, all sorts of different things that you need to know about. And what age can you hire? Can you hire a 15-year-old, or they need to have some kind of a work permit? Do they need something from their school systems? Those types of issues kind of come into play when you are hiring minors. There are a lot of laws that go into play when you're talking about these are just federal ones. Then when you're talking about employing people, um, the Independent and Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938 gave us the 40-hour week. It gave us minimum wage. At the time, it was a quarter, but it still gave us the minimum wage. There's a lot of things that we still do that are guided by the Independent and Fair Labor Standards Act. The Equal Pay Act of 1963 states that you should pay the same amount of money to a person who is doing the same job. This doesn't have to, this is not the Men versus Women Act that actually never actually passed. This one is equal work should get equal pay regardless of who's doing it. The Civil Rights Act, we're going to go through in the next slide. The Civil Rights Act has a lot of non-discrimination act wording in it, and being an equal opportunity employer. Age Discrimination Act says that you can't discriminate of older workers. That actually is age 40 and above, so you cannot discriminate and hire only people that are, 25-year-old hipsters type of thing. That's just not, you can't. I see it, and a lot of people will say it's the skills and that sort of thing. But if a person has the same skills as a younger person, you cannot discriminate them. There's the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. The Americans Disability Act of 1990 says you can't discriminate against people with disabilities. That's also the ADA is also the act that says if you have public access that you have to have it viable for people with disabilities. You have to have it to be able to get around if you're in a wheelchair. You have to have the doors automatic and that sort of thing. Family Medical Leave Act of 1993 talks about being able to give people the same job or an equivalent job after being allowed to spend time with their newborn or a sick parent or a sick child or a sick spouse. That is for companies that have 50 employees or more. California has its own federal Family Leave Act, so you probably need to look into that. Then the Equal Opportunity Act was updated in 1995 to include some other pieces. So let's look at some of those things that you cannot discriminate against. This particular, you'll see at the end of hiring notices, of job descriptions, of job announcements, that a company is an equal opportunity employer. And it really means that they will not discriminate against race, color, religion, sex, national origin. The Consumer Protection Bureau has added a bunch more. So I've added that in red, which is this their equal opportunity. It does not discriminate against the basis of race, color, religion, sex, including pregnancy, sex stereotyping, gender identity, non-gender conformity, national origin, disability, age, 40 and older, genetic information, political affiliation, marital status, sexual orientation, parental status, uniformed status, membership in labor organizations, or any other non-merit factor, which basically says if you got the skills, then we'll judge you on your skills, not on who you are. And that is probably the easiest way to say it. Judge them on their skills, judge them on their knowledge, judge them on their experience. Do not judge them on the things that make them who they are. And this comes into play when you're interviewing. There are certain things that you cannot ask about. You should stick to their experience and their skills and how that will apply to the job at hand. You cannot ask about their religion. You can't ask them about their country of birth, even their state of birth, where they were born, because there might be some sort of way to discriminate against somebody born in West Virginia, or you got burned by somebody in Texas, and if they happen to be born in Texas or from Texas, then that could give you an opportunity, whether you are cognizant of it or not, to discriminate against them. You cannot ask their age. The only thing that you can ask their age is if they need to be 18 or 21 to do the job. If you're hiring bartenders, then they need to be 21. If you're hiring somebody to work some machines or drive a car or that sort of thing, then they probably need to be 18. So you can verify it in that case, but otherwise you cannot ask their age. You cannot ask if they have children, what their marital status is, and what their family life is. It's not your concern as to whether or not they're taking care of an elderly parent, or it's their concern. It will become your concern if they don't get to work on time, or if they need to take a lot of time off, or that sort of thing. But that doesn't have anything to do with their skills and their knowledge and their abilities. Um, you cannot ask if transportation is an issue unless it's critical to the job. If they need to be driving from here to there, from office to office, you can ask them for a valid proof of valid driver's license, that they have to have it. Um, but if just getting to the job is the only transportation issue that you need, then that's not something. Whether they take BART or whether they take a bus or walk to work is not your concern. You can't ask them where they live. You can't ask them if they grew up in Oakland or if they live in Tracy, because that could discriminate against people that are living far, because traffic concerns, for instance, in the Bay Area. If they live in Tracy, they may be late for work on an occasional basis because of wrecks and the traffic that's coming over the Altamont Pass. If they if you work in San Francisco and they live in Walnut Creek, that you may want, it's natural to say that I'd rather have somebody local. I'd rather have somebody who can be sure that they're going to get to work on time and not have those commute issues. But it's not something that you should be concerned about. That's their concern, to get to work on time. You cannot ask them about their politics. You can't ask them who they're voting for, whether or not they're Republican or part of the Green Party. You can't even ask them if they're pro-union or not. That's just not okay. Like I said, in an interview, you need to maintain your professionalism and ask them about their skills, their abilities, their knowledge, and their experience on the job. You can't ask them about something that would give you the opportunity to judge them on anything other than those skills and experience. Okay, so once you've hired the person, you have a responsibility to withhold certain um, pieces of information and to withhold certain numbers, dollars amounts, and to be sending in those to the federal and to the state government. One of the videos I suggest you watch is "What's the First Thing to Do When You Start a Business?" And that is a YouTube video up in the "Let's Get Started" type of section in the classroom on Canvas. And it's a YouTube video that says the very first thing you should do is get a separate bank account, so that you are separating all of this money that you're withholding and money that you are making, and not mixing it with other things. So you need to make sure that you know how much you should be withholding in taxes and Social Security, in workman's comp, in Medicare. And you need to find an opportunity, a payroll servicer that even small. There is a growing industry of HR professional companies that work with small businesses, and they contract out and do all of the paperwork and all of the withholdings, all of the employee type of um, issues that we're talking about here. They'll do 401ks. They'll take care of the all of the withholdings. Like I said, they'll take care of even um, help you write a manual and all sorts of things that would um, help you so that you as a small business person don't need to to concern yourself with. Sometimes I used to work with a company as a nonprofit, and we, even though we were marketing ourselves as the under the nonprofit's names, we technically were employees of this HR firm because that way they had all of the control of our withholdings and our 401ks and anything else that has to do with those employee issues. So I'd actually suggest looking into having that type of situation. They're not expensive because they know they're working with small businesses, but they certainly take a lot of the stress off of being an employer. Okay, a couple other things that you need to think about when you're looking into hiring people is just some of the basic state and federal laws that you need to pay attention to. Certainly, we've talked about minimum wage. You need to pay attention to the local minimum wage. The highest minimum wage always trumps the others. So if it's $15 an hour where you want to employ somebody, then that's the wage that is. It's not the lowest. Some states still are at $7 an hour. I think the federal minimum wage is $7. The state of California is working its way up to 15 eventually. So you need to know what the minimum wage is. And again, it's the highest minimum wage in your region. It could be a city, it can be a county, it can be the state. Whatever it is, the highest one trumps the rest of them. 40 hours a week, 8 hours a day. Otherwise, it's overtime, and it's overtime if it's more than 8 hours, not more than 40 hours. So you can't put in 10 hours one day, 6 hours the other, and not pay overtime for those extra twos on the day they did 10. That doesn't work. So you need to pay attention to those work hours, and you need to pay attention to giving people their lunch breaks, their 15-minute breaks, and that sort of thing. Whether or not they're exempt or non-exempt, that has a lot to do with overtime pay, and it has a lot to do with giving them breaks and that sort of thing. Exempt people don't get overtime. Certainly need to be concerned about people's safety on the job. There's OSHA training centers you can go to and you can understand. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And there's actually one in Livermore that you could talk to, and they are self-proclaimed safety nuts. They can help you in making sure that your chemicals are stored safely, that they're labeled safely, and that sort of thing if you have those around. And there's my catch-all, many other factors. There are a ton of things that you come when it comes to hiring people. So I want you to make sure that you are covered and make sure as soon as you want to hire your first employee that you talk to somebody that has a background in it and has the expertise so that you can get off on the right foot. Once again, you'll look at this module and you will see, geez, I think there's probably 24 links and videos, YouTubes, and other things for you to look into. It's not an easy thing to hire somebody, and there's a lot you need to think of, a lot you need to consider. So make sure you do it right. Thanks. See you next time.